For more on how immigration is impacting the United States and also the immigration approach by this government, let's bring in former Treasury official and Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Rattner. Steve, what are we seeing as the immigration numbers go down?
Good morning, Mika. Well, look, the immigration fight is obviously not over. You're going to probably have the Department of Homeland Security shut down this weekend because the two sides can't agree on rules of the road going forward. But yes, it is very important to put the immigration thing in perspective and what the impact of immigration has been on in this country for a very long time. So to start with a long bit of history, if you go all the way back to the 1850s, as many people know, toward the end of the 19th century, we had a big wave of immigration that took our immigrant share of the population up to around 15%. I would tell you that my grandparents immigrated right around here, and if we had not allowed them in, I know I wouldn't be here today, and they were in Poland, and they probably would not have even survived the war. But then after World War I, we put in some strict immigration requirements, and the population of foreign-born dropped down to as low as 4%. And then in 1965, we reversed course and actually put in a more liberal immigration law. And that, plus, of course, we did have a lot of undocumenteds coming here. We're now back up at about this 15% of foreign-born in this country. So that's a bit of historical perspective. But to your point about population, immigration has always been important to the growth of the American population. And it's more important today than ever before because birth rates here are declining. You need 2.1 births per couple to keep a population stable. We're at about 1.6. We were actually up at, about 3.7 back in the 60s. But because of that slowing birth rate, if we did not have immigration, our population would have peaked right down here in the next year or so and begun to decline fairly steadily. If we maintain immigration at a reasonable historic rate, you can see that we can maintain our population stable at least until the middle of this century. And so immigration is fundamental to maintaining a growing population. Without a growing population, of course, you have fewer and fewer people working per retired person, which makes the burden on the federal government's finances all that tougher.
And Steve, in your next charts, you reveal how immigrants actually boost the nation's economy.
Yeah, so let's talk about the role of immigrants in the nation's economy. They obviously constitute a significant portion of the labor force. Probably many of you would guess that they could be as high as 54% of the farm labor force. But did you know they were 40% of home health aides? They were 30% of construction workers. And perhaps most remarkably, they are over a quarter. 27% of our doctors are born somewhere else. So imagine if we did not have immigration, what would happen to our health care? They're also very successful in business. If you look at what we call unicorns, companies worth over $1 billion, so these young, fast-growing tech companies mostly, you can see 44% of them were started by people who were born somewhere else. Where did they come from? Interestingly, the largest share came from India, followed by Israel, Canada, the UK. China was actually somewhat of a less contributor to immigration success in this area. And it's also true that if you look at the Fortune 500 companies, also about 45% of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies were either born here or their parents were born here.
So, Steve, immigrants also contribute to society in a number of ways, some that are hard to specify, but you've got some actual real numbers, too.
Yeah. So let's first talk about crime. And obviously, there's been a lot of talk from the Trump administration about how these are all criminals and so on and so forth. We know that only 14% of those who've been arrested by ICE actually have violent criminal records. But let's just broaden this out and look at the crime rate per 100,000 population. So if you look at violent crimes, U.S.-born citizens are here, legal immigrants are here, and undocumented immigrants are down here. So they commit crimes at a lower rate than native-born Americans. The same is true of property crimes. The same is true of drug violations. One reason for this is probably pretty obvious. If you don't want to get deported, the best way to not get deported is to not commit a crime. And so you can see that as they come here, they are very law-abiding. They also contribute economically. This is the pay of native-born Americans by age group, 20 all the way up to 80. And you can see that first-generation immigrants do earn a bit less, than the average American citizen. But by the time you get to children of immigrants, they actually earn more. So they are, in fact, contributing more to the federal government than they are getting back in services. So they are a positive economic contributor both to the government and to the economy, as we just talked about.
Really important charts this morning. We appreciate you bringing them to us. Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Ratter. Steve, thank you again. And Reverend Sharpton, I mean, certainly the American story is an immigrant story. We know it's about that, the mosaic. It's about the melting pot. It's about we are because we're a nation of immigrants. But Steve also points out it's in black and white, or some of the charts are color coded. But the idea that with the actual benefits that immigrants bring to the nation's society and its economy.
I think that is why it's so important what he lays out, is that they are not a drain on the economy or on the American people. They are an addition. They're something that helps. And when we get into these arguments about immigration or even DEI, we look at the fact these people are producing things and are making things better. And the people fighting it are the ones really getting the affirmative action, people taking care of their kids, their relatives. I mean, when you look at the White House, what is more affirmative action than Trump's kids? I mean, would anybody else put them in that position? So I think when you look at the facts, as opposed in terms of where the benefits are, as opposed to the rhetoric, you start saying, wait a minute, this is not only something we should eliminate, it's something that's good for the country.
The president also has, well, an immigrant as a spouse. So Jen, your thoughts here just about how, it's an American story, but also for this year, it's a political story.
Yeah, and it really struck me that the chart that Steve had that showed the children of immigrants doing better than native-born children, right? Like that is, to have children succeed their parents, that is what the American dream is about. But on the politics side, there was NBC News poll this week. 2/3 of American people think that ICE has gone too far. 2/3 of the American people do not agree on anything, and 6 in 10 think that Trump is handling immigration poorly. That this is the issue that was supposed to be the thing that brought him to the White House, perhaps the first time around, maybe the second time around, is the thing that people are resenting the most.